Into it. Yes, this is of course your host Devon Sanders, and welcome again to K.Y.R.A TV. How you doing, brother? Lead with your name and what you do.
My name is Stuart Bolus, and I guess my day job is I'm a civil servant in the United Kingdom in the Department of Business and Trade. Um, but I am in this interview, notwithstanding to my work, this is from a personal perspective. I'm going to give my opinions.
Mm-hmm. Smooth, smooth. I appreciate that, man. And what's your background? Like, what's your ethnicity?
So my ethnicity, I guess the way I have to describe it is ethnicity in the UK is listed, I think, a bit differently than it is in the US. On the census, I mixed white and black African. So my father is English, and my mother is a Ghanaian Brit. So she is a Ghanaian citizen and a British citizen, and she immigrated to the UK in the 1980s.
Smooth, smooth. So we got a diaspora, fellow diasporan on the call. Okay, so let's get right into it. Um, First, I would like the people to know a little bit more about you. You know, obviously you're from um, England, like born and raised, but you have had your mom again is from Ghana, and you have ties in Ghana. Can you tell us a little bit more about your travels or experiences in Ghana?
Yeah, sure. So yes, you're right. I was born and raised in the UK. But when I grew up, my mother would always take me and my older sister uh, to Ghana, usually every 4 years. Um, so I was there as a baby, but I don't remember that trip. Then went there again when I was about, say, five, six. Then again, I was like 10. Then again, when I was about 14, 15. Then again, when I was 18. And then I was
Hmm.
22, 26, 29. And then again this year when I was 33. So I've been to Ghana
Smooth,
at various
smooth, smooth.
stages. And the good thing is, if
Oh
you leave
wow.
it around 3 or 4 years, the country changes, but not too much. Because if I'd only gone like once every 10 years, which happens to some diasporans, you are just not there for the big changes. And it's like you're kind of revisiting a different country each time. So I've
Is
seen Ghana
mm,
progress over the years. Yeah.
mm, mm. That's real. That's good, man. I bet. So I guess my follow-up question to that is, how do you feel about the current state of Ghana, of Africa in
Hmm.
general, and then of Ghana specifically?
Well, that's a very big question. I'm not going to pretend I can speak for all of Africa because I've been to various countries in it, but the vast majority of Africa I've still not been to. Africa has definitely changed in my lifetime. I'll definitely say some countries are going through very difficult times. Places like Sudan and South Sudan, for example, have got conflict and things like that.
Mhm.
If I also focus on the West African aspect, which is the bit I probably know best, it's going through a very turbulent time, I would say, in some aspects, especially in the Sahel region. But I'll say for Ghana, Ghana's coming out of a very difficult economic catastrophe, and that it's now entering a period of relative calm and economic progress with its new government, which they elected in December last year. So I'll say Ghana is now in a potentially hopeful period after coming out of a very difficult period. Yeah.
Mm, that's real. I got you, man. And so being a diaspora and then really having a very, I feel like, intimate relationship with Ghana, which is really cool, traveling every 3 or 4 years, you do have a very close relationship with the country. What are some of the first things that pop up when you think of Ghanaians in general, like just Ghanaians?
That's a very interesting question. When you say Ghanaian, of course, it kind of depends what sort of Ghanaian. If they're Ashanti, if they're from the south, if they're from the north, etc., etc., you'll end up seeing like different sort of stereotypes and things like that. I guess if you were to try to be broad, it's Ghanaians are generally very hospitable people with a very rich history and are very welcoming and are generally quite proud of their country and are very open for other people to come and experience it. Um, but if you speak to our parents' generation, as me and you are of similar age, uh, I'll be honest, there is a sense of fatalism because Ghana has not lived up to the expectations they had when they were young. And for anyone who's descendant of someone who is a Diasporan, the reality is your parent left because Ghana could not provide what they needed. And even though we can go back to Ghana, we can enjoy being part of a culture and sharing that sense of, togetherness and, harking back to where your ancestors are from. There's a reality that you do not live there full time because the country is not able to provide in this modern day what a lot of people would expect a country to provide for them, be it a stable income, be it um, the ability to see a real future for yourself and your family. Ghana does not provide that for a lot of people. Um, there are various reasons why that is, but the reality is emigration from Ghana is quite high because of those reasons.
That's huge, man. Thank you. Wow, wow. And you hit some good answers, some really good
Hmm.
answers. So I appreciate you. And so my next question is: you are familiar with the year of return and beyond the return in Ghana? Yes.
Yes, yeah.
There we go. And so my question is, how do you feel about the initiatives, year return and beyond the return, and diasporans actively coming to Ghana as their ancestral home? You being a diasporan, you having traveled to Ghana for so many times over the course of your life. How do you feel about this now broader return?
Okay, that's an interesting one. I think on the whole, it's a good thing. However, the way it's been implemented has been done in a way to extract money out of diasporans. I think that's been the primary aspect of it. Um, so I would say it's more angled towards people in the United States because their connection to Africa has been broken by the historical atrocities of slavery. So their knowledge of where they're from is not exactly clear for a lot of them. Although Ghana being a point of exit of many of their ancestors from Africa into America, it makes a very logical place for them to go. I also feel Ghana can benefit from the year of return and this sort of initiative because if you look at Africa, if you're an African American, for example, you'll be like, okay, there's a where would my ancestors have come from? West Africa is one of the main parts, and you go, okay, let's focus there. And it's like, if you look at language, okay, if you can't speak French, you're likely to say, okay, I want to go to an English speaking African country. And then you're left with Gambia, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria. Sierra Leone, Liberia, because of their histories of civil war, their tourism industries are basically non existent. Gambia has a tourist industry, but it's not geared towards that. It's geared towards rich Europeans, European women in particular. That's something I can go into another time. And Nigeria also it kind of struggles to advertise itself for tourism. So Ghana ends up kind of being the one left standing out of this situation. Um, now, I think it's a good thing, and people should go and see like the slave castles and understand the history which is there and understand the rich culture. However, there is a sort of odd narrative from the government where I think some African Americans will come to some of the slave castles, and yeah, it is difficult to go there. I don't know if you've been there yourself. I've been to once in Cape Coast and Elmina, but you see the essentially dungeons where slaves were kept, and the guides recount the atrocities that happened. It's very emotional. It's a difficult experience, I think, for anyone to understand, but people did that. But then I think there's a certain lack of the context of okay, yes, but the community around this castle were aware what was going on. And a lot of the slaves who were in there were not from that area. They came from either from the north of Ghana now or even further afield. And they were brought down. So I think there's a lack of saying, okay, but there's a very good chance that your not ancestors not actually from this particular area. You'll need to go elsewhere to kind of have that real connection. And that's kind of left out. And so I think people come back having a slightly um, not as nuanced understanding of what happened as maybe should be. And I do think like a lot of the year of return ended up focusing on events in like these slave castles, which was all on the coast, and then like certain events in the Accra, and the rest of the country just kind of got ignored and didn't really benefit from that at all. And I think there's a bit of a feeling of some people have benefited from this economically, but the country as a whole has not. And there's also the added fact of there's some African Americans have come and they want to settle, and they've been gifted land in certain areas. And the way that's been done has not been entirely clear cut. And some Ghanaians have found themselves actually dispossessed of land they thought they owned. And then an African American comes and says, I own it now. And I feel some of the African Americans who've come, their attitude towards Ghanaians, it's not a meeting of equals in their eyes sometimes. And they end up displaying an area of dominance because economically they come with a lot of power compared to the locals, and that creates an imbalance. So I feel that probably needed to be managed a lot better. And I think when African Americans, and not just African Americans, diasporans as well, who come, there's some expectation that because, you know, ethnically speaking, they may look the same, that establishes kinship. It doesn't in the same way because when you're in Africa, the fact that someone else is black doesn't mean that this person's your friend. You're talking to someone who potentially nearly everyone they've ever known in their life is black. Everyone they've loved, everyone they've hated is also a black person. Therefore, you also being black means nothing to them. And for them, it's ethnicity. Are you from my ethnic group inside the country? That's what's more important. Can you speak my language rather than you're black? They're like, you could just be another African. What does that mean to me? Um, so I think, especially Americans, they have an idea of racial identity politics in the US that doesn't work in Ghana or many African countries. Actually, I could say South Africa probably is a different kettle of fish. So I won't say that's in there, but speaking Ghana, definitely it doesn't always seem like that. And if you're a diasporan, or you kind of realize that you are still treated like a foreigner, and they see you as someone who's got money. The fact you're black is frankly you're immaterial completely, and I think that takes some time for people to understand. So I feel that overall, the year of return was a good idea. I mean, it's good for people to come and experience the culture and everything, but there's an economic incentive behind it, and there was a cultural context which I don't think was really delved into, and I think some people came out of it a little burnt.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good. Like in terms of like being misinformed, like, oh yeah, I came from this specific, Cape Coast is, more of the God community. I came from this God community, and it's like, no, you might have came from,
Well, the people in Cape Coast are
Asante.
fancy to begin with. So let's
I'm
don't go
Fonte. There we go, Fonte.
guards in the crowd. But yes, yeah, and you may say, oh,
Guys in
why?
our crowd.
It's
There we
very
go. I
unlikely
appreciate you.
if you're a Fanti. It's very
You know what
unlikely
I mean?
your
Exactly.
ancestors.
So you're most likely from the hinterlands, more inland. You could even be from another country altogether,
Yeah, like Burkina
Upper Volta
Faso.
or Burkina Faso. Exactly. You know what I
Because the
mean?
reality is,
So,
this slavery economy it wasn't going to work if the slave castle was enslaving the villagers next to it. Where do you think they were buying their supplies and things like that? It's they
exactly.
were taking
And
people who
and
were completely
also
alien to the area they were in.
in the aspect of, you know, some communities, Fonte communities, thank you for that, for this already, but I think it's worth being said on a year basis or the year to year basis, or even to have some kind of memorabilia speaking on when they, you know, did this reconciliation in terms of, you know, indigenous chiefs or indigenous kings rather having sold their own people into slavery, and just so many things. The kind of
Yeah, I think there
idea
is
of I
there
got
is
you,
a
brother. The idea
yeah
of them having castles rather than them being known as dungeons, which is more apropos to what they generally were, and so many other nuances like that. So I'm glad you mentioned how you know that community isn't necessarily those who were being enslaved.
yeah. I think there's an added thing about when people talk about reparations, which generally I actually support the idea, but for example, in the Caribbean countries asking reparations, I think is wholly appropriate. And for what, if you are have if your ancestry is in the Caribbean, it is almost certain that some of your ancestors were enslaved. For a country like Ghana to ask for reparations is slightly more nuanced because there are certain communities in Ghana where people were enslaved and trafficked in this way, and there are other communities in Ghana who were wholly participating in this and made money. And the reality is, a lot of those communities or institutions who participated in that are the ancestors of some very influential people in Ghana today, which is
Yeah,
why
yeah.
that conversation is not easy to have because you are essentially questioning why some very rich people in Ghana, why their families have been rich for so long. Because realistically, if you go back 150 years or so, or even 200 years, why would some of these people be rich? Not all would have made their money on that. Some would be merchants and other things, but definitely some people, some chiefs, that's where their money was coming from. And after slavery ended, they took the wealth from that and they invested it in other things. But, you know, I don't think it would take
That's
very
valid.
long to
Yeah,
find out who those people are. But it's a difficult
yeah,
conversation to have because you'll be pressing some buttons.
yeah. Yeah. It's some very important people's buttons. You know what I mean? And so, next question. Um, you mentioned this already, and then just to maybe tie it up, clear it up, be more concise with it. What is one dislike and one like that you have that you've seen with this integration in terms of the diaspora, namely African Americans and Africa, namely Ghana, especially you having come, right before the year of return and have been hereafter as well. I think you have a really unique perspective in terms of like seeing the before and afters of this
Yeah.
initiative, and it's
Um,
still ongoing. Yeah. So what is one like, one dislike? Yeah.
and one like is definitely it's put Ghana on the map in ways which it hadn't before. I mean, Ghana, it's always had a bit of tourism. I remember like back in the 90s and the 2000s, tourism industry was very like struggling. People weren't visiting
Yeah.
like all that much. Um, and that's definitely changed where people see Ghana as a tourist destination. People will go on holiday there. When I was young, it was more people would go there to visit family or to do like, you know, charity and aid work. And now there's much more of a tourism sector. And I think that's definitely been boosted by that. But I'll say the problem is, yeah, I think it's the integration is not wholly there. And I think when you look at Ghanaian politics, where African American or diasporan communities are, they're just not being mentioned in the national conversation. You know, they don't have representatives in parliament. You're not seeing them joining the local councils in their areas. So I think they are missing from the national conversation. And when you have these problems where like some African Americans in an area and they bought land which someone already owns, it's not the African Americans' fault because they've been told by the person they bought it from this land is fine. And but then it creates a property dispute and so on and so forth. These are cultural differences and exchanges which are quite difficult, and that hasn't been handled well. And I feel if there was a bit more inclusion of them in the national conversation, these issues could be tackled and understood better. So that when they come to an area, they need to understand that you need to really make sure the person you're buying this from, uh, actually has the documents properly, etc., etc. And you know, you come from America and the economic power you have, how would this impact the community? How will you be perceived by these people rather than just being told, oh, you're our brother, you're our friend? That's a very simplistic way of looking at it. So I think that needs to be dealt with better. Yeah.
I like that, like having a more holistic approach, not just this rose tinted glasses, romanticized. You can come and kind of do whatever you want, but realizing that you're coming to a culture within a context, within a group of people, and you still have to, you know, integrate and be humble in a way, and learn the cultural nuances that you're not necessarily granted just because of your melanin, even though it's open. But again, you have to also show different levels of integration, not just that we share the same color, but we share the same values. We share the same, social norms. We are, cordial. We know how to be hospitable. All these things. I like how you also said, you know, have the diaspora, whether it be African Americans, um, Brazilians, diasporans in Brazil, diasporans in Europe, but just having them a part of the political conversation around this initiative, because then you actually have not only a seat at the table, but you have the proper voice to, impact the decision making and the legislation and the policy around this initiative that seems to be very one sided in terms of politically, in terms of the economic gains. And obviously, the diasporan is getting their cultural, reconciliation, a reunification, but it still feels like there's this gap of, even on the, Ghanaian side, like they're missing out on something, much more important than money. And on the diasporan side, they're missing out on something um, that allows their state to be much more long, or have more
If I
longevity
if I
to
was
it.
to offer
Yeah,
a little something into that, it's like
yeah,
one
yeah.
thing if you grow up in a diaspora, one trap you can fall
Mm-hmm,
into is you end up becoming a bit of a white savior, even though you're not white, because you feel I've grown up in the quote unquote West. So I've learned how to do things quote unquote well, and I just need to go to quote unquote
mm-hmm,
Africa and teach them or show them the way we do things in the West, and it'll work. And because I have a connection to this place, I'm better than just a white American doing it. In reality, you're not much different from them. And you turn up, you don't
mm-hmm,
understand the culture really, and
mm-hmm,
your project or whatever doesn't end up working because in reality, you need to know how the things work there. Just because you can create a project in London, it's no why is that going to work in Accra? I mean, even the way people work is just completely different. The way they think is slightly different. Uh, and I think you just go, oh, but my mum or my dad is from this country. I understand it. Do you? I mean, do you
mm-hmm,
really? You and also you can be talking to your parent who tells you a story about the country they left in like what 1998, and now you're coming back to the country in 2025. It's not the same place anymore.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's true, and definitely, the Obroni that they call, foreigners, both, Anglo-American, European, and African Americans, is, obviously Obroni meaning foreigner, but, African Americans, and diasporans generally, when they're called Obroni, when we're called Obroni rather, it could be, taken, you know, most of us take offense to it. And it's
Yes,
like, no, but I'm from here ancestrally. But it's like ideologically, it comes more so from an
it's
ideological
just
perspective,
almost
not
just
just a skin
cultural,
tone.
right? And
Exactly. Like,
and
what are
I've
the
been called
ideas?
I've been
What
called
are
an
the
Obroni.
ideas? I got you,
Mm,
brother. What are the ideas that you hold? And even though you have this melanated skin, you still have the thinking of the Western world. Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. And I used to be called that as well when I was younger. I used
Mhm.
to take offense to it too, because I'm like, I'm in England, I'm called black, I come to
Mhm.
Ghana, I'm called white, what the hell is going on? But in
Mhm.
reality, it's like if an American, even someone who had English parents, right? But if they were born in America, grew up loving baseball and American football, if they went to London and went, I'm English, with their very heavily accented American accent, and says, I love the Denver Broncos,
Mhm.
no one's going to know what the hell they're talking about. And you could be like, oh, but I'm
Okay.
from here ancestry. But people will be like, but you don't, okay, yes, your parents are from here, but culturally speaking, you're an
Mhm.
American, you're not English. And
Okay.
you saying
Mhm.
you're English, not many people are going to
Mhm.
buy it. But they
Mhm.
don't, but I think people, as I said, that's a realization. But just being white doesn't mean you're one of them. Okay, the same thing happens when you're in Africa, and it's just
Mhm.
a realization of that. Because the difference
Yeah.
is, if you're in the diaspora, if I was to go to
Mhm.
a place in America of African Americans and I'll explain to them my background, they're more likely going to be more welcoming to
Mhm.
me. If I go to France and meet the African diaspora there, they're more likely going to be friendly because there's a diaspora kinship, but that doesn't necessarily translate when you go to the
Mhm.
homeland itself.
Exactly. And even in the diaspora, there's still some nuance where it's like, oh yeah, you're from England. Oh yeah, you're from France. Oh yeah, you're from the States. You know what I mean? And it's more welcome because we're all diasporans. But just to speak to, like, we do have these idiosyncrasies that we ought to
Mm,
acknowledge because they do create bridges when we, share them with others, but they can create barriers when we don't, and there's cultural differences and we
mm.
don't necessarily have the understanding or patience enough or just the humility to to learn about those cultural differences and hopefully bridge them. You're doing great. I have like two more questions and then we're done. Phenomenal. Okay, and you got me on the Fonte part. I'm still learning God, Fonte, Airway, where they all at. But I do appreciate you, Cape Coast, Fonte. Okay, I got you.
Mm.
And okay, one of the last ones is: do you think the year of return, beyond the return, is doing a good job of creating long-term unity? I know you had mentioned this, before in terms of, diasporans coming here and realizing the amenities that they once lived in abundance with and for and at back at home are not present in Ghana, and really might change things in terms of their long-term stay. So I'm curious, and not even just staying here, but even networks, even keeping contacts from across the Atlantic. So even when you come back. So again, my question is: do you think the year of return, beyond the return, these initiatives is doing a good job of creating long-term connections, long-term networks, long-term unity?
Uh, I would say on a personal level, definitely it could be because if you come and you make some very good networks, then it gives you the basis to come back and to build something. As a government initiative, it was a previous government thing. No, not at all. Because once you came here and you spent money, they pretty much abandoned you, to be honest. There was a big complaint about that. But, people saying, I don't understand how
Wait, can
the,
you
how
say that one
the
more time?
law works.
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat? Yep. Can you repeat what you just said? Once you come here, they what?
Once they come in, the previous government, what the current government's policy towards it, I'm not sure, but the previous government, once you were
Mhm.
here, the sort of help they gave you afterwards to stay here also was pretty minimal. Because obviously, some more companies that don't want to settle here, they go, of course, would love you to come here, but they used to see it as you'll invest your money here and we make money. For you to be like, I need help navigating X, Y, Z, the government wasn't there to help, and was more interested in bringing in new people. And so I think the previous
Mhm.
government was very
I
poor
see what you're
on
saying.
this. Uh, I mean,
Mhm.
yes, you could, people came and they made networks, and there is an African American community in Ghana, which I think you may be more familiar with than myself, because there's quite a lot of them
Mhm.
in Legon near the university, and in Aburi. I think quite a lot of them lived around there.
Mhm.
So there is a future to it, and I think there is something there. But again, it's not. But if you go on Ghanaian news, no one is talking about the African American community. It's just not in the national conversation. And I think for it to really be something quite significant, it has to be. It has to be people saying, "So, what is the future of the African Americans here? There's some of them will be having children in Ghana. What's going to happen to them? You know, are they just going to end up going to Lincoln International American School and just, still being very American in the Ghanaian context, or are they going to feel like they're Ghanaian citizens? Is there actually a motive to make these people Ghanaian? And, you know, as you said earlier, is there a call for them to integrate? And is that call one which will be welcome by the African Americans or one they feel is imposed upon them, for example? I just don't think this conversation is being had in the Ghanaian national consciousness, and it needs to be because I think there definitely has been a lot more because of the year of return and beyond the return. But as I said, the previous government saw it as a money making thing alongside the moral part of it, and the significance of what it means for society was completely skirted over.
Yeah, no, that's huge, man. You batting 100 right now. I appreciate you. Last question: how do we unite? You being a diasporan, coming here so many times, me being a diasporan, coming here a few times, just two times. but definitely staying long periods of time, seeing everything that's happening, geopolitically on the continent, Ibrahim Traore, what's happening in the States, African Americans attempting to come here, how Brazilians are somehow like on the periphery, marginalized in this initiative, sometimes ignored completely in this initiative, and other diasporans. Like, how do we unite with all this what's going on? How do you feel we can unite?
Yeah, well, that's the killer question, right?
It
Many have
is.
tried. People much smarter, much more powerful, much more better connected than me. Most of them have failed. I think there is I'd say in my studies, doing a master's study in African studies, but also just my own kind of research, which in my spare time, it's like when you look at some of the great Pan-Africanists, a lot of them are either in the diaspora or Africans who started thinking like that when they were in the diaspora themselves. So when does Kwame Nkrumah become a Pan-African idealist? It's when he's living in London and he starts meeting African students from all over the continent and he starts saying, hey, actually, we've got a lot in common. But obviously, going back, he became president of Ghana. But then when you study his speeches, which he used to make as a president, because a lot of them using radio broadcasts to the nation, as you did back then, because people didn't have TVs, he'll be mentioning things happening in Ethiopia and across the continent. And you do ask yourself, I mean, you've been in Ghana a while, in a small village in rural Ghana, hearing the president talk about Ethiopia, what would that have even meant to these people? People who'd never left Ghana in their lives. Africa's a humongous continent. The size of it, Europeans don't truly kind of get how big Africa is. Even Americans, I think, and trying to
Yeah, it's
unite
true.
a very disparate correlation of ethnicities, of languages, of religions, all on the basis of what exactly? But we all live in Africa or have an ancestral tie to Africa. For a lot of people, that's just not enough. We've got the North Africans who, frankly, completely not, a lot of them are not interested in this message in the slightest. Um, you have people in the diaspora who, I've met people from the Caribbean who just say, they have some people in the Caribbean, I'm not going to say all at all. There's some people who feel that because their ancestors were sold by people in Africa, that they don't have a reason to be close to these people anymore because they say, well, ancestrally they enslaved us, so why should I have anything to do with them? Um, and yeah, as I said earlier, I think African countries do have a role in reparations, especially to the people really in the Caribbean, which they're not really doing. So I think there's a lot of things which kind of need to be managed first, and there has to kind of be a goal of what do you want this unity to do? Is it just to develop Africa? Then you can have something along that line. Say we should trade with each other to develop ourselves and be more economically prosperous and make our societies a better place to live. Um, but then there's a lot of African leaders who will use the language of African unity just to benefit themselves, you know. And when you have a continent which is largely run by people who frankly don't care about their citizens, the idea of unity becomes one of a bunch of rich men sitting in a hotel room, a hotel conference room, writing communiques which are frankly meaningless. And that's what many people would say. African unity is all the leaders go to a hotel somewhere, and that's pretty much where it ends. Um, so I think it's about what does this unity, what's it supposed to achieve? Is it to be that, people with dark skin would get more respect if the motherland was a much more economically prosperous? I believe it would be. Um, but I mean, I can even say, ask you a question, which is you are in Ghana right now, which is going through a rapid appreciation of its currency. So I imagine when you go to the bank, the amount of American dollars you get out, amount of CDs you get out is less because the American dollar against the CD is not as prosperous as it once was. You would think people in Ghana would be happy about it. Many of them are, but there is a strand of people, especially the elite, some of the elite, who aren't happy about that. Because they have people abroad sending them money and they get less money for it. And so they're now saying, oh, we prefer a weak currency because if someone sends me dollars, I get more money. But you're asking for your currency to be a broken economy, right?
Exactly.
Um, so there's this thing like where is the idea of unity? There's a lot of Ghanaians. I make this final point. I've rambled a bit, which is the problem with African unity is that if I use Ghana as an example, Ghana, I would actually say is one of the worst countries I've seen for. I should have actually said this as an issue over with Ghana, but you said this about the year of return was classism. There are people in
Okay.
Ghana who, house help and stuff is very common. You probably may have seen it or heard about it. If you were to say to a middle class or an elite Ghanaian that their child should really go to the same school as the school the maid her maid sends her son, you're gonna have a I am not into that. There are people who are very happy with the status quo of the hierarchies it creates and their place in the hierarchy, and anything to break that down to make the country more equal, they're going to resist that every step and turn. And as long as Ghana and Africa as a whole is broken into these hierarchies of people, building any unity through that is going to be very difficult.
It's true that classism is very real and very strong here. And it's globally, of course, with this capitalistic, just regime hegemony dominance in terms of you know westernization, but also just in terms of economics. Like is it's capitalism is seemingly the way, unfortunately. But there are aspects of socialism that are relevant and working. Communism that are relevant, and working, and mixes of it. So I really do like that. Definitely, I see it as in terms of everything you said. Um, Definitely breaking down those class structures would be of the most importance, as well as everything else you just mentioned. You mentioned a lot, so I'm attempting to grab
Yeah,
what you
yeah,
said,
yeah,
but I
yeah.
know that was the most
I, I'll definitely say that
powerful.
I'll leave finish like, and I know you'd have experienced this in Ghana as well, because when you meet some Ghanaians who haven't been educated, and they meet you and they realize you are educated, there's an internal submissiveness you can even feel in the conversation, and I don't get that in the
Mm,
UK. And I went to a state school in the UK. I didn't go to private school, and I think in the UK you're more taught like critical thinking, can be who you are. Obviously, we have private schools here, and people go there tend to do better. It's just it is what it is. But in Ghana, it really feels like if you don't go to one of these boarding schools, God help you, because your school is just not going to equip you with the things you need, and they just become resigned to it. And for
mm.
them, it just becomes if I want to succeed, I need to leave this place because
Yeah, yeah.
I'm now in a system. I haven't been given the steps up, be in a better place, and how the hell am I going to get there? The
Hmm.
idea of like a Ghanaian who didn't go to a great school, really, really making it. There aren't many examples of that, as far as I'm aware. Everyone
Hmm.
is like, I went to this school, I went to this school, and for the elite, children of the elite now, they're all going to international schools, which want like $10,000, $15,000 term. What Ghanaian has this
Just to
money?
go exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It's true, man. And so, last thing before we go, a phenomenal job, brother. I appreciate you. I'm gonna turn off my camera because usually I leave the frame, but it's virtual, so I'll just turn my camera off. And this is a moment for you to talk to the people. This is a moment for you to really express your heart of hearts, but more than anything, like speak, genuinely and truthfully and authentically. So the way it goes is you're gonna say, "Dear Black man, it is okay to," and then you fill in the rest. Again, we have supporters from all over the world, millions of different viewers: red, black, blue, purple, tall, skinny, short, old, young. So again, it's really just a message for your demographic. Again, being a Black man, and again, young people, as young as like sixth grade, so like 10 years old, and we have people in their 60s who watch this. So again, dear Black man, it is okay to. Okay, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna turn my camera off. Do you think?
Okay. I'll say, dear black man, it's okay to fail. sometimes, and you shouldn't be pressed into a culture where every step you make is one towards your success. Sometimes things don't work out the way you expect them to. I moved to Ghana when I was 29, thinking I was going to start a business and spend the rest of my 30s making a lot of money. Did not work out, and a year later, I had to return back to the UK. Which some would call that a failure. It wasn't. It was an education of knowing actually what Ghana meant to me as someone who is a British and Ghanaian citizen, and also a recognition of understanding who am I in terms of what Ghana is. I think I spent a lot of my childhood, especially when you grow up and you're of mixed parentage, of like how English I was and how Ghanaian I was. And when I grew up in a small English village, I became very aware of how different I was. And then when I came to Ghana, I realized just how English I was. And I spent a lot of time trying to understand where I fit on this binary. And it took that year in Ghana, I mean, it helped that I was older, I suppose, to realize the binary is nonsense, right? It's not a box you can tick. I'm just a unique individual. Everyone's relationship to their place of origin is quite different. And I'm Ghana now as a place I can go to, and I don't feel an internal battle with myself to define what it means. It just simply is. Ghana is my second home, but my primary home is Britain. And to feel that I can be as Ghanaian as the people in Ghana is nonsense. I didn't grow up there. They'll have ways of thinking which I just don't have because I didn't grow up there, and that's perfectly fine. And that's what I learned. So something I thought was a failure at first. So I went to Ghana, came back. I didn't make the money I was supposed to make. I actually gained something much more valuable. And so you should think of life as not just all these little steps towards my success. It's sometimes you're sidestepping and it's actually giving you another route which can get you to where you want to be. And realistically, your life isn't always going to be a great list of your victories. It's going to be a very messy tapestry, which you're the only one who truly holds a pen to it, and you're the only one that can truly interpret it and appreciate it. Um, and that's okay. And you shouldn't really hold yourself accountable to anyone else in that way. And only you can really understand you. But I'll say to the dear black people I'm talking to that understand your own relationship with Africa, and it may even be you don't really have one, and that's I'm not going to ask you to. It's really up to you. But just understand Africa means something I think different to everyone. The same way your ties to the country you grew up in will be quite different. And Africa itself is still writing its own story of what it wants to be. And so, because that story is not entirely defined, your relationship to it also does not need to be entirely defined. And that's fine. I think I kind of know where I sit on that scale. And I only really figured it out, I guess, at the age of 30. So you can come to it early in life, you can come to it later in life. That's perfectly fine. You may never come to it, and that's also fine. Each life is unique and special in its own way. And keep walking the path you're walking, and you'll get to where you need to be. And that's all I have to say on that.